Home batteries are marketed as devices that can pay for themselves, charge when electricity is cheap, discharge when it's expensive. Pocket the difference. On paper, it sounds simple, almost too simple. This isn't a prediction, it's what the data already shows. But when I ran the actual numbers using real utility pricing from 3 different markets in 2025, the results didn't match what most companies claim. Today I want to test whether a home battery can actually generate net revenue, or whether the physics and economics quietly erase the profit before it appears. Over the past 2 years, retail electricity markets have become more volatile. Time-of-use pricing is now standard across most of California, Texas ERCOT, and parts of the Northeast. That volatility creates an opportunity, at least in theory. In some markets, peak rates now reach 50 cents per kilowatt hour, while overnight rates drop to 8 or 10 cents. That's a 40-cent spread. If you could buy low and sell high repeatedly, the math starts to look attractive. But there's a difference between price spread and net profit. Every time energy moves through a battery, losses occur. Charging wastes heat. Discharging wastes heat. The battery degrades slightly with each cycle, and those small inefficiencies compound over time. The question isn't whether arbitrage exists, it's whether it survives after you account for the losses. This next part is where most explanations quietly fall apart. At the center of this is something called energy arbitrage, buying electricity when it's cheap and selling it back when it's expensive. In simple terms, it means charging your battery during off-peak hours at 10 cents per kilowatt hour, then discharging during peak hours when the utility would charge you 50 cents. The difference is your gross margin. But there's a constraint most people miss. Round-trip efficiency is never 100%. A typical lithium-ion home battery operates at about 85 to 90% round-trip efficiency. That means for every 10 kilowatt hours you put in, you only get 8.5 to 9 kilowatt hours back out. The rest becomes heat. So instead of asking, can I make money from arbitrage, the better question becomes, is the price spread large enough to overcome the efficiency loss and still leave a profit? Here's the key insight. Arbitrage isn't about the technology, it's about whether the price structure creates enough margin to cover the physics tax. If the spread is 15 cents and your efficiency loss is 15 cents per kilowatt hour cycled, you break even. Anything below that, you lose money every cycle. To test this properly, I modeled 3 real utility rate structures from 2025. First, California PG&E EV2A, peak summer rates of 46 cents, off-peak overnight rates of 16 cents, spread 30 cents. Second, Texas ERCOT during high demand periods. Peak rates fluctuate, but occasionally hit 55 cents. Off-peak rates average 12 cents. Spread 43 cents. Third, New York Con Edison. Peak rates around 40 cents. Off-peak rates around 20 cents. Spread 20 cents. I assumed a 13.5 kilowatt-hour battery with 87% round-trip efficiency, 1 full cycle per day, 365 cycles per year, battery degradation modeled at 2.5% capacity loss annually. This is where the numbers stop being intuitive. At first glance, California looks profitable. With a 30-cent spread and 87% efficiency, each full cycle generates about 17 cents of net profit per kilowatt hour stored. Multiply that by 13.5 kilowatt hours, and you get roughly $2.30 per day. Over a year, that's about $840 in gross arbitrage revenue. Texas performs even better during peak months. With a 43-cent spread, daily profits can reach $3.50. Annualized, that's over $1,200. But New York is marginal. A 20-cent spread barely covers the efficiency loss. Net daily profit drops to about 90 cents. Annual revenue, $330. So yes, under ideal conditions, in high-spread markets, arbitrage can generate revenue. This is the mistake everyone makes. They assume year-one revenue scales infinitely, but that's not the full story. Once you account for battery degradation, the curve bends. By year 3, capacity has dropped to about 92%. Your revenue per cycle decreases proportionally because you're storing less energy. By year 6, capacity is at 85%. Revenue has declined by 15%. By year 10, the battery is operating at about 75% of its original capacity. That $840 annual revenue in California has dropped to around $630. This degradation curve is the most important part because the system doesn't fail suddenly, it fades, and the revenue declines in parallel with the capacity loss, meaning your payback period stretches longer than most projections suggest. This leads to the first trap. Most people assume that any price spread means guaranteed profit, but spreads compress during low demand seasons. In California, winter spreads often drop to 12 or 15 cents. Once you subtract the efficiency loss, net profit per cycle falls to just a few cents, sometimes zero. That means arbitrage revenue is seasonal, not constant. Here's what installers won't tell you. Cycling your battery aggressively to maximize short-term revenue accelerates degradation. The second trap is ignoring opportunity cost. If you cycle your battery for arbitrage every day, it's not available for backup power during outages. You're trading resilience for revenue. And in markets with thin spreads, you can end up spending more on the battery's replacement cost than you ever earned from arbitrage. The real constraint isn't hardware capacity, it's whether the market structure consistently delivers spreads above 20 cents, and that those spreads last long enough to justify the upfront cost. Ignore that, and what looks like a revenue stream quietly turns into a depreciating asset with minimal return. Here's the mental model that fixes all of this. A better way to think about this is not as a profit center, but as a cost avoidance tool with optional revenue upside. The primary value of a home battery isn't arbitrage, it's avoiding peak charges during your actual consumption. When you frame it this way, the economics become much clearer. For example, instead of cycling the battery daily for arbitrage, reserve it for the highest cost hours when your household is actually using power. That way, you avoid peak charges without accelerating degradation. If the spread is large enough, say 30 cents or above, then occasional arbitrage makes sense, but it should be opportunistic, not the core strategy. Similarly, in markets with demand response programs, batteries can earn payments for providing grid services. That revenue is often more predictable and less wear-intensive than daily cycling. The best approach isn't maximum cycling, it's strategic cycling that balances revenue, resilience, and longevity. And once you optimize for total cost of ownership rather than gross revenue, the return on investment improves, often dramatically. So yes, in 2026, home batteries can generate revenue through arbitrage, but only in markets with consistently wide price spreads, and only when degradation is factored into the business case. The difference matters. In California and Texas, the numbers can work. In lower spread markets, arbitrage barely covers its own costs. Most households won't recover the battery cost through arbitrage alone, but they can reduce total energy costs while maintaining backup power, which is often the more valuable outcome. That's the real value proposition. In the next episode, we'll look at vehicle-to-home integration and why your EV might be a better battery than the one marketed for your house. Not because the technology is new, but because the economics just crossed a threshold that changes the entire equation. This channel exists to do what most energy content doesn't: explain how these systems actually behave, not how they're marketed. If you want to understand energy the way system designers do, not how it's marketed, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Microgrid Mindset.